Well, I think in the healthcare supply chain specifically, we need to take a little more responsibility for being better at educating students about what's out there and what opportunities are out there. Because I think, as I said earlier on, healthcare is broad. So students could still go work on the manufacturing side and go work at GE or go work at any of these other big publicly traded companies. Or they could go work for an affiliate, like a group purchasing organization where I work, or they could decide to go down the provider side. And then there's also consulting partners who are involved in healthcare supply chain.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we're going to be speaking with Ryan Burke. He's the VP of Strategic Sourcing at the Pandion Alliance in Hayes. You know Ryan. I think you talked to him a few months ago. He recently got connected with us. We were talking about his involvement with the Young Professionals Advisory Council, a conversation we've had before with Derek Gallagher and Rachel Anderson. But he then, as we were talking, told me about his passion for getting in front of college students and really creating a much more direct pathway from education to healthcare supply chain professional. I'm excited to get into it today.
Ryan's great. Yeah, to your point, I've gotten to know Ryan a little bit. He is talking about something that is extremely important to our supply chain right now. We've got to get younger, better, smarter people into our supply chain. Because we got old guys like Gary in it. We need really young, dynamic, really good people. And Ryan is trying to do that. So listen along today. I think you'll enjoy it.
All right. Young, dynamic professional Ryan Burke up next.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Right now with us in studio, Ryan Burke, Vice President of Strategic Sourcing at Pandion Alliance. And we are going to be talking all about speaking to young supply chain students and really bringing in that next generation of healthcare supply chain to the forefront. And honestly, I think we all know that we need to make this investment, and we need to make this investment now. And we'll talk a little bit about your involvement with YPAC, Ryan, which is the Young Professionals Advisory Council at the end, but we had an episode with Derek Gallagher and Rachel Anderson highlighting that. So I want to connect the dots between those two episodes before we get started as well, because if you didn't listen to that one, by the time we're done with Ryan, you're going to want to. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks guys so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about my passion today, which is telling young professionals and students everything there is to know about the healthcare supply chain and why they should work in the healthcare supply chain.
Much needed, for sure. Thanks for being here.
So, Ryan, how did you find your way? I feel like sometimes, very rarely, there's somebody who said, I've wanted to do healthcare supply chain since, I was a young kid, or I was in high school, or as I was getting started in college. But a lot of times, people are kind of just finding their way there, and it's a kind of a haphazard path. And I know that's part of the work of YPAC, is to make it a destination career and have people wanting to get into that from an earlier age. But how did you find it, and what's your experience been like since you started?
I've been fortunate to spend my entire career thus far within the healthcare supply chain, but I do have kind of a really unique story. I actually, during my undergraduate studies, thought I wanted to be on the clinical side of healthcare, and I went to school to be a physician assistant. And then during the first couple semesters of the clinical rotations, I realized I don't want to do this clinical stuff, but I still like healthcare, and I still like the idea of helping people and helping others. And so I was still drawn to that. And I was very fortunate that the school I was at the time had a healthcare operations, a healthcare administration program that I was able to transfer into. And so that's where I did end up getting my undergraduate degree from, was a healthcare operations program. And as you guys know well, colleges and universities are really good at placing nurses or doctors into internship or residency programs. They're not really good at placing healthcare operations professionals. That really isn't a typical path or a field of study. So what I did is I quite literally called all the area hospitals around my market and explained a little bit about who I was and what I was looking to do. I explained that I was interested in healthcare operations, and I had read a chapter in a textbook about healthcare procurement. And I was fortunate enough to land on one of the large IDNs up here in Rochester, New York, talked with the director of purchasing, who's actually one of my first mentors, and she agreed to bring me on as an intern. Fast forward 14 years later, and I've had a great career thus far in the healthcare supply chain.
So, hey, Ryan, pleasure to have you on. I love your experience and how you got to where you're at. Just that proactiveness to reach out, to ask those questions, I think it exudes your passion for what you wanted to get into. But you mentioned mentorship. You had a gentleman that mentored you. I want you to talk a little bit for our listening audience about how you looked for that, how you sought it out, how you've valued who was a true mentor, like Justin Poulin is absolutely a mentor to Hayes and us on the podcast commercial. I mean, he's amazing.
We can go on and on and on about this because he told me how good he was.
Oh, Hayes and I, thousands of people he's mentored, and it's amazing. So
and
we
all
love
of
Justin.
them
We
have
love
been
him.
super hyper successful. He tells us they are.
Absolutely. Well, now that we've broached that subject with Justin, Ryan, good mentors. What have you taken from them, and how are you giving back to be a mentee, as JP would put it? So appreciate you giving some input on that. Please, Ryan.
Yeah. So the advice of how you get a mentor, how you seek out a mentor. So there's a few ways you can do it. One of the easiest ways is to just ask. And that's may seem kind of obvious, but sometimes if you're early in your career or you're a young professional, it may be intimidating to go walk up to the chief supply chain officer's office or the CFO's office and say, hey, I want to learn a little bit about what we do enterprise-wide here. What is this all about? Help me learn. I was fortunate early in my career that my old leader, my old VP of supply chain, exposed me to a lot early. So he dragged me along to various executive meetings, capital deployment meetings, clinical executive meetings that I had no business being there as a, first year in my career. But I ended up leaving that meeting with notebooks full of notes, right? And understanding and a better understanding of what was happening and the little work that I was doing day in and day out and how that was contributing to kind of the greater good of the entire organization. So if it wasn't for that first mentor that exposed me to any of that, that experience takes quite some time to get. And it's really experience you can't learn in school. You have to learn it on the job. You have to learn it on the front lines. So that's one of my advice is just to ask.
Well, clearly it's important. I'd love to take you back to that early time. Can you give us like one thing, maybe that put you on the spot here, but one thing you learned from him that just went, aha, I wouldn't have figured that out as quickly if it wasn't for him. Anything that come to mind?
Well, the funny thing about my first mentor in the healthcare supply chain was he spent the first half of his career in manufacturing supply chain and specifically working with NASA and sending rockets to the moon. So as you can imagine, his level of supply chain expertise was far more than I had gotten in my early schooling or what I had learned, at the healthcare supply chain level. So just his view of supply chain holistically and his understanding of processes, lean processes, and manufacturing. He used to take out graph paper and draw pictures and mathematical formulas. and write up a whole process flow map while he was having a conversation with you. I was always so impressed. And the best part is after he was done with the conversation, he'd rip off the piece of graph paper, he'd hand it to you, and you could walk away with it, and you can refer back to it, as you were going on. And I still have those graph papers in a folder somewhere buried in my office that I just plan to hang on to forever because they are permanently kind of ingrained with, what I learned, coming up.
That's fantastic. That honestly, Gary and I have the same story because Justin he flow charts, everything that we have to say and everything. And I have all those graphs and charts too, from Justin. Yeah.
You don't know how much, Ryan, you're allowing us to get at Justin. Just a little bit.
This is the first time. We've been doing this for over 2 years, and the two of you have been battling on each other, but have left me out of the fight. And that's the only reason I'm not fighting back. I'm just going to take it. I was due.
Thank you, Justin. Awesome, Ryan. Awesome.
I'm happy to help turn the tables.
No, even better. We love it.
Ron's invited back. We're going to bring him back next week.
That's right.
But to your point of mentorship, I think it is, it's vital. And I was never in a situation where I literally said, you are my mentor, but I've got 6 or 7 folks today, even at my extremely young age, who I consider mentors. And I mean, one being Gary, obviously, and Justin, obviously, but really, honestly, other folks who, I call and ask about, what would you do? And how would you suggest that I word this or whatever? And man, they're invaluable. And I know certain hospital systems, University of Kansas specifically, they've got a really good mentorship program. It's actually there's a formula, there's actually an agenda, and it's all it's flow charted, if you will, and they do a good job. But I think more places need to do that in order to get the younger folks involved earlier and, use that as a selling tool when they're coming out of college.
We are lucky that the Association for Healthcare and Resource Materials Management, or AHRMM, for those that aren't familiar with the acronym, we love our acronyms in healthcare. They do have a mentor match program that they make available to their members. So that's another way that young professionals or students can get involved. They can learn more about AHRMM. They can log in, find out what it's like to set up a profile and search for a mentor, whether it's through a common job lane or job description, or job field of study, or if it's just outside of their specific network. There's all sorts of opportunities with the AHRMM Mentor Match program.
So let's talk about your passion, speaking to supply chain students. How did that even come about? I mean, I understand how you found your pathway in as a student and, calling around to hospitals and trying to see if somebody would give you an opportunity to learn more. But as you mentioned, the placement's not really great. So if the placement's not great, I'm also thinking that maybe the opportunities to go speak to supply chain students isn't something that just gets cast out and people are invited in to do that. So how did that come about for you?
Yeah, and that's all part of my mission, if you will, of building the awareness and building that pipeline for the future of healthcare supply chain talent. So really, it's just my stubbornness in reaching out to colleges, much like I did reach out to the colleges and universities back during my early career. So there's a couple local universities up here. One of the schools I actually have my master's from, so I had a relationship and a connection there. So I did tee up the idea of mentorship in student development with their deans in their supply chain school, and also their industrial engineering school, which was very well received. And I kept those relationships as folks move. And so I've had opportunities kind of at various colleges and universities to speak with supply chain students, to speak with industrial engineering students about why healthcare supply chain.
So why don't we talk about maybe what we should be looking for in those students too, right? So it's not just, how do we get to speak to them and how do we get access and how do we get them information? But, are there certain skill sets or like a prototype in a way of a student that is going to be successful in supply chain?
Yeah, I love the industrial engineering students because they are wicked smart. Boy, getting a a group of industrial engineering students in a room to look at a process is so inspiring and refreshing and makes you feel young again, quite frankly. And just hearing their passion and just their thought process as they're mapping a process or evaluating a process. And boy, they're committed to their craft, and they'll put their nose down, if you will, and really focus on a project and deliver on the actionables that are within that project. I've had real results from projects that I've worked on with some industrial engineering students that I've had the pleasure to work with in the past.
Talking great language, 5S projects to lean projects to optimization to KPIs to QBRs. You talked about acronyms. I love where you're going with this. Industrial engineers, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
I just totally made a note of it, Ryan. Great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
So what are some of the key messages that you're trying to get across? Because there's really two different vantage points here, right? As somebody who's trying to speak to supply chain students, you want them to understand certain things, but it may be difficult because it's not the way they view the world, or that may not be how they view their post-collegiate, life, right? And so what are some key messages that you want them to understand? And then versus what are some things that resonate with them that may not be part of your key messaging, but is important, for people to think about when they speak to supply chain students to get them engaged, because it's what matters to them.
Yeah. The first thing I say to any student is that healthcare, it has to be a passion. It has to be a calling. It's very different than clocking into a 9 to 5. You are truly delivering patient care. You are supporting the caregivers. So that's key. And students really see that when they have the opportunity to go on site to a hospital and do a tour and see that, oh, wow, these widgets that the supply chain department is moving from the distribution center up to the patient floors has real impact on the patients, which could be a family member, which could be someone they know. So I always level set with, healthcare, and working in healthcare has to be a passion, has to be a calling, or else you probably won't find joy in working in healthcare, because there are some limitations that we all know about, especially early on in your career in healthcare. These students, as you said, are being recruited from all sorts of industries. Every industry has a little bit of a talent gap right now with the baby boomers sunsetting and retiring. And so the compensation and some of the benefits and some of the attractions, if you will, that our manufacturing and industry partners can put out are just much more comprehensive and, quite frankly, higher salary than healthcare providers are. So one of the things that I tell students is that if you want to start in healthcare supply chain, you want to start on the provider side, you have to be patient and you have to want to learn as much as possible. During my early career, I became obsessed with healthcare and the healthcare supply chain. So after my time working in the purchasing department, my 9 to 5, if you will, I would return to the hospital after my shift and just round the nursing floors. I'd speak with the clinical leaders. I would move wheelchairs. I'd round the floors for IV pumps and channels. I'd bring linen supplies to and from departments. So I tell the students I tell this story to students because it's important for them, whether they're in healthcare or not. You have to be willing to go that extra mile. You have to be willing to put the work in early, to set yourself apart from your peers and those that you're, competing with. If you are truly looking to build a career and kind of work your way up a ladder.
What's the incentive specifically around healthcare, right? Like, I feel like ROI is a big part of that conversation because we don't, we're competing with other industries for students that maybe didn't have that interest in healthcare or being a clinician initially like you did and want to be attached to healthcare. What's some incentives? And when I say ROI, it doesn't have to be monetary.
Yeah, because the shock they'll get when a young professional straight out of college with a fresh degree gets that supply chain offer letter from the provider will be a little bit of a shock. I remember, I came out of school with my shiny undergraduate degree and I had all the confidence in the world and I did my interviews and I nailed them. And that offer letter came in the mail and I opened it and I was all excited and I thought I'd go parading around the neighborhood and my jaw hit the floor because I was making more in my summer job at the local car wash than my offer was for my first real career job within the healthcare supply chain. So that's real. That's eye-opening. But, I'm also a story of if you stick with it and you find a mentor. So that's my answer to your question is, you'll build relationships in healthcare that you're not going to build in manufacturing, or you're not going to build in kind of a shareholder focused company. You really get connected to the greater mission. So that's really, if you're a mission driven person, that's kind of the ROI that you'll see early in your career. And that will work your way throughout your career, whether you're mid career or at the tail end. Working in healthcare truly is a noble cause.
Ryan, you brought up my bandwagon as the mission, and we're all about the patients, right? Mission focused. If you keep that in mind, in my understanding, if you keep the mission first, you get the fiduciary responsibility that always follows. I was taught that a long time by Sister Pat. I'll give credit to that a long time ago. But let me ask you this, going back to that discussions with people that want to be a part of this industry and the students and anybody else you talk to, do you feel like there's a maturation needed or an explanation of the mission, or do you kind of learn that pretty quick? It teases out that they want to be part of not stocking shelves, at a grocery store, but they really want to stock shelves that are supporting ultimately a patient on the end. So how do you tease that out? How do you recognize that or really understand that feeling that they want to be a part of that?
Well, I think in the healthcare supply chain specifically, we need to take a little more responsibility for being better at educating students about what's out there and what opportunities are out there. Because I think, as I said earlier on, healthcare is broad. So students could still go work on the manufacturing side and go work at GE or go work at any of these other big publicly traded companies, or they could go work for an affiliate, like a group purchasing organization where I work, or they could decide to go down the provider side. And then there's also consulting partners who are involved in healthcare supply chain. So there's many paths that a student could take. A lot of it just depends on, where they see themselves. So, we see a lot of these students that are getting dual bachelor's and master's degrees end up in consulting early on because it's ultra competitive, but it's high reward with the compensation and with the visibility. So not every student's going to be that high level type A, right? Who's going to go work at one of the big four. And so those folks, you'll be able to identify those folks just as you meet these students and have conversations with them. I don't think we should just focus strictly on colleges and universities either. I do think there's other areas to reach out to talent, whether it's young professionals maybe working at the local Walmart or Amazon or whatever it may be. We're competing against them right now. And my colleagues would say, every job description they write is trying to compete salary and benefit wise with Amazon or Walmart in their local community. But we're thinking about that the wrong way. And we should be looking at their talent and trying to recruit them to want to come work in healthcare. Is just another path to try and build up the healthcare talent pool.
All right. So I think there are some challenges that exist, and you probably have a long list of challenges just for recruiting into, healthcare supply chain. And I think you kind of talked a little bit about it is, even the financial, right? Like we're going to have some people who think they're interested and get that offer letter and have some non-healthcare offer letters. But I want to kind of tease out the challenges that exist that are the most important. Like if you were to prioritize, 2 or 3 and say, these are ones that we as an industry have to solve for right away, or we're going to be, just continuing to put ourselves, down a difficult path. What would those challenges exist as it comes to these students and how we can pull them into the fold?
Yeah, number one is we need to build a comprehensive internship program at every level within the supply chain, within the enterprise supply chain. On the manufacturing side, they have it. On the GPO side, they have it. On the provider side, as Hayes alluded to, there are some providers that have it, but I think everyone on the provider side needs to have some type of connection to an intern program, whether it's at the high school level or the college level. And it needs to be specifically focused on healthcare supply chain. And then number 2 is providers. We definitely just need to catch up. And my colleagues have been saying this for a long time with our industry partners when it comes to supply chain in general. And I say that because when a supply chain student with a master's degree who had an internship at Boeing and an internship at GE comes to a hospital and sees how a supply chain operates at a hospital facility, it's going to be completely eye-opening for them. They're going to say, where's the demand planning? Where's the forecasting? And, all that tactical and technical supply chain stuff that they were learning in school. Several provider organizations are that progressive and have it, but there are still some that we need to catch up. I mean, we need to have those standard operating procedures for how you work in a supply chain and really be able to plug in students into our supply chain, where right now, still a lot of the supply chain talent, isn't necessarily plugged in. It's kind of brought over, or, we need to fill a hole, or we have a vacancy in the warehouse, and it may not be as proactive or in forward looking as I think it could be.
How do we feed that creative mind of a young professional who doesn't have the experience? If you're coming to a healthcare organization that doesn't have forecasting and demand planning and all of that, and yet you have this somebody with a master's, a young professional coming in who at least conceptually, has some understanding and expectation around that. Could they not be, part of the solution, or could that not even be part of the internship program, is to sort of begin to lay that foundation and almost create their future job after the internship, because everybody else is busy just trying to keep the ship afloat?
Absolutely. And I think providers should be focused on building up that bench talent as much as possible, bringing on as much of that young talent who have that experience, bring them in as part of the team, bring them in as part of that decision. They don't need to be the decision maker, but let them come and join those executive meetings, because they're going to have great ideas. And while their learning curve for healthcare will be steep, their supply chain brain will be good, because it's fresh out of school. They've done their internships. They definitely have a lot to learn still, but they're going to bring incredibly valuable ideas, and they're going to be passionate, and they're going to rely on your feedback, which is always one of the most exciting parts of having a mentee, is that they look to you to provide guidance, and you have the privilege to then advise them what you would do or what you do in this situation, or say, hey, how would you approach this? Or here's how I would approach that. So those are the real conversations that happen with students and should be happening between mentors and mentees.
Ron, what you just said reminded me of Coach Spurrier back in the day, who coached at the University of Florida. Routinely, during the middle of a game, on a random down, he would take his entire starting offensive line and throw out his second team line, and they'd play either one or two snaps randomly. And they'd always ask him, why are you doing that? He goes, well, it keeps them on their toes, also makes practice much, much better, because they know they're going to play. And it reminds me of you taking someone who, is kind of new to the organization, fresh out of college, throwing them in to the big boy, to that big meeting. All of a sudden they pay attention more. They feel like they're part of the team better, and likely, they might stick around longer. They might be able to offer, it gives them a different perspective. So anyway, I like that idea and that concept a lot, actually, what you talked about.
What I'll say is, a student in that type of setting will also, they may not do it in the meeting, but if you're their mentor, they'll definitely do it after. They'll ask a lot of the why questions. Well, why do you guys do that? Well, why did you just approve that without any, conversation? Well, why? And so that that type of thought and thinking can be very disruptive in a good way, to get folks thinking about things differently instead of just, kind of the same old way we've always done
Well,
things.
we forget our whys. We get so ingrained into the way that we have established. I mean, part of it is to be more efficient. You do sort of have to standardize things and methodical approaches to the way that you do things, and you forget the why. So I think even challenging the why at least opens the door to, maybe I do need to shift my strategy or my methodology here for sure. All right. Last kind of a quick question. Then you can talk about YPAC before we close. Do we only find these students in the college setting?
No, we can definitely recruit outside of the traditional university setting. I'm looking deeper into even the high school area, and perhaps, working with guidance counselors to start talking about careers in supply chain. 20 years ago, there were hardly any supply chain degree programs. Now every college and university has a supply chain degree program. So my goal would be to have a healthcare supply chain track within a lot of these degree programs or minors, if you will. And that starts early. That starts early in high school, where young students are looking to grow in their career, and they're taking aptitude tests, and it always says you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, you're going to be this. Why not have it say work in the healthcare supply chain? And then there's professionals that are clinicians who work side by side with us in the hospital, who may be feeling burnt out. And certainly we don't want to take any more bedside nurses away from our systems or our hospitals, but who maybe have an appetite for business and want to learn a little bit more. Those are key partners to bring into the supply chain. Several progressive supply chain organizations have value analysis teams, have clinicians or CMOs leading or co-chairing those value analysis teams. And that's critical because a surgeon talking to a surgeon within a surgical value analysis setting brings credibility that even the most prepared and data-driven supply chain executive and professional isn't going to get to. So I'm a big proponent of reaching and having conversations with your clinical colleagues and partners about supply chain. And even if they don't end up working in the supply chain, being an advocate for supply chain. Supply chain was certainly thrust into the spotlight over the last few years with COVID. We're still in the spotlight and we have to stay there. And that's why we have to continue to educate and advocate for supply chain.
All right. So after that college education, whether it's baccalaureate or master's, or maybe we're starting much sooner and bringing them in, potentially right out of high school, whenever that period ends, they start their career. And this is where I think the Young Professionals Advisory Council can really pick them up. So for the senior leaders that are listening that maybe have not listened to our prior podcast with Rachel and Derek on YPAC, or anybody else who's a new professional who's just finding the Power Supply podcast, and it could be 3 years from this episode, somebody could be looking back on it and listening to it as well and not have heard any of those episodes. Can you just tell them why they should get involved in YPAC and how to do so, and really what that high level mission is?
Sure. So within AHRMM, there is a council called YPAC. YPAC is made up of 9 members, and those members come from various organizations within the AHRMM membership. And they're all young professionals, so between 18 and 35. There are certain requirements. You have to apply to sit on this council yearly. And if you are selected to sit on the council, you have the unique opportunity, an important role of advising AHRMM and the board and the AHRMM staff on programs that are important to young professionals as it relates to AHRMM and more broadly the healthcare supply chain. But importantly for any executives or folks that aren't young professionals listening in, you can get involved with YPAC through webinars or through the annual conferences or any of the association or trade association conferences that happen within our industry. We attend all of them. We love to meet and talk with you. And our mission is to connect young professionals within healthcare. That's all we do. Whether it's on the manufacturer side, the affiliate GPO side, consulting, or the provider side, we're a network group. We connect people, and ultimately we have the opportunity and privilege to share the collective voice of the young professional with our board, senior leaders, and quite frankly, the American Hospital Association as well, because AHRMM rolls up through the AHA. So if your listeners are interested in learning more, I encourage them to check out the AHRMM website. There's a link to YPAC that's listed under the Get Involved tab, or they can reach out to anyone at AHRMM or myself or anyone else on the YPAC. We're always happy to have a conversation about it and how you can participate and contribute to young professionals in healthcare.
Well, I'll tell you, many senior leaders are part of YPAC at this point, and many more are going to be thrust into senior leadership positions and to set the industry up for success. This networking piece is huge, and it's part of the reason why we see social media as being such a key component to also supporting those initiatives. So I'll also put this out there, Ryan, any YPAC events, information, we can include that in our Power Supply newsletter and help get the word out and help make sure that people know, because we're going to need these young professionals to be stepping into some pretty big shoes very, very soon for the success of healthcare. And I really appreciate you seeing that ahead of time and really trying to promote that and get in front of those students long before they even start their careers. So it's a commendable effort on your part and a great interview. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure and letting me speak about my passion.
Gentlemen, did you hear that? Holy cow, that's pretty cool.
He wasn't talking to you, Hayes.
Oh, that's true. I'm sorry. That made me feel almost good for a second, and then you shot me down. Okay.
Ryan Burke, VP of Strategic Sourcing at the Pandion Alliance. And, you know, honestly, Gary, you are somebody who champions mission nearly every single episode. And I loved hearing about Ryan's mission, not just the mission to serve the patient or the mission of the healthcare organization, but Ryan's mission to help the entire industry and make an impact by getting in front of students and talking to them about the importance of healthcare supply chain. And also, I loved his number one takeaway. We have got to develop internship programs, and it will not only bring value to the students and help us prepare for the future, but there's value to be derived today by having fresh eyes and young, passionate, enthusiastic, emerging professionals at the table to just help give us some insight.
No, Justin, I love his passion, man. He is a young leader. I'm curious to going to see when he is the dinosaur age of Hayes, where's he going to be at? He's going to be like running something big. I'm telling you, he's got vision. He's got passion. He's reaching out early. I mean, he's not get paid to go out and talk to students. He's not going, he's sharing the message, which is huge. And I do think there's a huge opportunity on this internship program, and I want to see more of it. So love to hear more of our listeners. If you are seeing those programs, share it with our team, share it with Power Supply. Let us know on LinkedIn, whatever medium you want to find us. But this is definitely an avenue that got me fired up. So great conversation with Ryan. Really enjoyed it.
I'll tell you, we almost diverted from our shticks here during this episode where the two of you started picking on me a little bit. I'm glad.
Yes, sir.
I'm glad things are back to normal before we wrap this episode. It's been a great one. Ryan Burke, a great guest. And I do want to remind everyone, our episode's now approved by AHRMM for 0.5 CEs. Just look at the link in the description of the podcast. It'll take you to a quiz. You complete the quiz. We email you the certificate. This is an excellent exchange of services. I'll also add the fact that I am hosting the AHRMM podcast with Mike Schiller once a month for updates. And we also have SMEs that will be interviewed on a monthly basis as well, subject matter experts. So make sure you check that out. And then finally, our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. It's the best way to listen to the show, but you'll find us on all the podcast apps. And most importantly, we believe in the power of social media and networking. Ryan talked about how important it is. Part of that networking is liking at least the post. If there's a topic that we've discussed that you love, go to LinkedIn, go to Facebook, wherever you are, give it a like, and even better, comment on it if you have some insight. Maybe we left something out of the discussion that's really important that should have been talked about. Add it on social media. Come and join us. Or even better, share the episode out and tell others what you got from listening to the podcast by sharing that social media post along. On behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, you can reach us by email, info@powersupplymedia.net. But we want to thank you for listening to this episode of Power Supply.